Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Donation Discussions. Have you ever wondered what a coroner really does? Well, today we're getting all of the answers. I sit down with Charleston County Coroner Bobby Joe O'Neill and we go over all of the things. So we're giving all of those details on what really happens on a crime scene, what does the interaction between an OPO and a coroner look like when it comes to death investigation. So you'll learn all of the things that you need to know and lots more. It's a great episode. I can't wait for you to get to check it out. So let's get into it. Well, Bobby Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for being here. We're really excited to have you. I would love just to get to know you a little bit more. Could you maybe explain how did you get from being, an ER nurse to now county coroner, and give us a little bit of your background?
Sure, and thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's really an honor to be with you. I came through the coroner's office or learning how to be a death investigator through the medical field. So as you said, I was a nurse, and my first actually interaction with decedents was actually when I worked for a hospice agency. And so I would have to call the coroner, and I started kind of questioning, well, why do I have to call the coroner to report this death when I'm here with this family? And that sparked an interest. And shortly thereafter, I moved to an emergency room setting and again would interact with decedents and families. And I had an interest in forensics, and I met the coroner at the time, and that was in 1996 or 97. And then in 1998, she was also a nurse and asked me to join the office back in 1998. And so that was from sort of learning how to interact with hospice and decedents, learning through the emergency room about forensic science and taking care of victims of crime. And sometimes those victims died of their injuries, and sort of how we interacted as a hospital, but then also moving into the actually death investigation world, where I started investigating deaths and taking care of decedents. So it's sort of the short version of how I got to become the coroner. I was a deputy coroner for many years, and then my coroner retired, and so I decided to run for office. So I'm in my 6th year as being the elected coroner for Charleston County.
Could you explain what actually are the roles and responsibilities of a coroner and what is not?
Yes, we get that a lot when I see on television, and it's not like on CSI.
Yes.
My main responsibility as a coroner is to speak for someone who can't speak for themselves, to tell their story, to help determine how they died, what their cause of death is, determine which circumstances surround that, so their manner of death, whether that's a natural death, an accident, a suicide, homicide, or maybe we can't determine. But then a part of that is identifying that individual, notifying their family, helping their family through the process. But in the end, it's all about speaking for that person who can't do that for themselves. And so that's sort of in essence what we do. There's a lot of things we are able to do in order to do that, whether that's going to the location where that person died, whether it's photographing injuries, whether it's reviewing their medical records and making sure we understand what their history was. It may be ordering an autopsy if we're not sure what happened, and being able to document those injuries or those findings, and then reporting those back to families. And then we sign the death certificate and some other documents that families sometimes encounter. Those come to us first, and oftentimes we're the ones handling those. But in essence, we're the storyteller. My client is the person who died. Their family is an extension of that, but my main responsibility is for that person who has died and making sure that we get their story right.
When does donation enter your world, and what does it look like for the coroner's office to interact with an OPO like Sharing Hope?
Yeah, so we interact with an OPO it can be at different times along the process. Oftentimes we're notified, specifically in hospitals, where someone has passed away within a hospital setting, and maybe the family is considering donation. And so we'll work hand in hand with the OPO, make sure that that does not impede our investigation at all, whether it's going to impact how we investigate. If we're considering autopsy, making sure that we're working together to do both things at the same time, which is possible. It is possible for someone to be a donor and for us to accurately speak for them. But it's a communication and a relationship between the coroner's office or medical examiner's office, depending on where that is located, and that OPO. Other times, it could be that we're somewhere where someone has died outside of a hospital, and it may be that we see on their driver's license that they're a donor, or family makes a comment that they think they want to be a donor, and we might make that referral right from the scene or for We Are With Families to the OPO, so that they can have that connection point. So it kind of varies depending on the situation. But I would say it's always at the top of our mind. I think that's a part of the process, is understanding that although death is final, the wishes of that individual aren't necessarily final at that point. There can be some things that can still honor that individual, and we are glad to be a part of that.
It's a very common myth that, if I have that heart on my driver's license, then the medical team isn't going to work as hard to save my life. Could you shed some light into that?
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen that experience. I've never had that experience that that's the case. I'm sure that is at the thought of some folks, but I've never experienced that. I think if anything, probably my experience has been that people watch it a little closer because, even if the person wants to be a donor, I mean, they want to save their life as long as they can, but they also recognize that this person is a giver and they want to take care of them. I've never encountered that as a problem.
Another one we hear is, my loved one wants an open casket funeral and donation won't make that possible. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So, whenever we have a situation where we need to conduct an autopsy and families want to be a donor or considering it, we work out those logistics. For the most part, donation does not impact what we do investigatively. There may be times that we limit the amount of donation. I mean, we could limit certain organs, or we might work with the OPO or their family and say, we really want to look at this part of the body. So for example, let somebody has a head injury, for example, from something. We may say, well, you can't take the eyes, for example, or the corneas. They may have an injury that is above the diaphragm. And so we may say, well, let's just limit it to those organs that don't impact what we need to take a look at. And so sort of my mantra in our office is we try not to ever say no to donation, but we want to work with the OPO and family to make as much happen as possible. I'm not aware of any time that an autopsy has impacted or donation, has impacted the legal system or impacted our findings. And so we work together to work those out. We want donation to happen if we can. And then as far as delaying or impacting an open casket, we get that same question whenever we're conducting an autopsy. Families are concerned, even if donation's not part of the conversation. And they believe that it impacts it or slows it down, or that they won't be able to see their loved one. And that actually is not the case whatsoever. They can still see their loved one. They can still have an open casket. And I would say most of the time, no one ever knows that happened. And so there are rare circumstances, obviously, but I think my experience has been that we're pretty honest with families if we think it's going to impact that, so that they have all the information they need. But for the most part, it has not been an issue. And once we explain that, families are okay.
You mentioned, dealing with families, and there's so many emotions that you deal with on an everyday basis. I think, it's the worst day of someone's life, and for you, it's your everyday work, is dealing with people in really tragic circumstances. Have you seen maybe an example of a time when donation has provided hope to a grieving family, or maybe one that you wanted to share?
A couple things come to mind. I think, during that time when somebody's lost someone, especially if they know they're a registered donor or that was their wish, even if they're not registered, but they've had the conversation about donation, I think that gives that family a sense of peace, that they're honoring their loved one with whatever it was that they wanted, even if they can't donate everything, right? Even if it's just something, that I do think there is a sense of peace that they have been able to honor their loved one, especially for those deaths that are unexpected, and they weren't expecting today to happen, as almost a last gift of their loved one and honoring whatever their wish was, which is why registration is so important, or at least having a conversation with your family and let your family know. The other times when I've seen it really impactful was really with youth. And when we have a young person and that is really a surprise, no parent or grandparent wants to have a loss of their child or grandchild or someone of youth. But when they then can sort of realize that loved one, that little one, however old they are, although their life is ending, they get to be the person who saves the life of another one of that same size and that age. And so their child lives on, honestly. And so that can be just really rewarding that, yes, they're grieving. They've lost their world, but they just saved somebody with their world. And that can be a sense of relief. And I've experienced that.
Is there something, if you could use this time to share with South Carolinians, like just a message about donation in regards to the hope it can bring? Is there anything you'd like to share?
I think what I would probably say is don't immediately say no or block it out. At least educate yourself and your family on what that does and the process and what it means. Because I think when we don't know how things work, that's when we're afraid of something. And we're afraid of the outcome. We're afraid of whatever the myth is or the conspiracy might be,
Yes.
as it could be, is to educate yourself, understand what that is, and then have a conversation with your family. You may know to yourself that you would like to be a donor, but if you don't share that with anyone, then no one knows that. And sometimes people don't want it on their driver's license for whatever reason, but then have the conversation with the people that mean the most to you and who are going to be making decisions for you. It's sort of like letting your family know on a living will or, powers of attorney on making decisions for you for healthcare. This is an extension of that.
Yeah.
And make sure your family knows what your wishes are so that they can honor those. Because if we don't know what they are, then we don't know what to do.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that can just really provide a lot of clarity at a time that I'm sure is, so overwhelming and confusing in every other aspect.
Yes. It's sort of like families that you never discuss sort of what somebody wants as far as funeral arrangements, that they don't know whether they want to be cremated or they don't know whether they want to be buried, or if they're buried, where do they want to be buried? Yeah. And when we have families who that has been part of the discussion point, then at the time when they have that loss, it takes away a lot of stress because they've already had the discussion and they already know what their loved one's wishes are. And donation would be the same. If they already know what their wishes are, then there really isn't any fretting about it. And there really isn't any worry, is this what they wanted? You've had the discussion and you know what they want.
So important to have those conversations and just provide that clarity. And it's really just a way to love, the people that matter most to you. Okay, we're going to transition a little bit to some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
If you're ready.
Sure.
Hardest part of your job?
Oh, gosh. I would say the hardest part about what we do is making notification to families. So that's one of our roles, especially like, for example, if we have a car accident or something, it's our office that's actually knocking on that door at 2 a.m. And it's an honor to be the ones who do that, but it's also a monster responsibility because we know we're getting ready to change their world forever. And that is very humbling. And so that's probably the hardest part.
Most rewarding part of your job?
It's probably the same thing. You know, that even though we're knocking on the door at 2 a.m, we also know that we're there to help them, to answer their questions, to walk them through it, to know that we have got a seat at the table and that we are part of the solution and not part of the problem. People ask all the time, how can I do this and sleep at night? And it's, I'm really comfortable with knowing that I didn't cause whatever happened, whether that's the natural disease or the car accident or whatever that is, but I get to be someone to help them walk through the process. And so it's probably the same answer, that notification, although it's the hardest, at the end, it's also the most rewarding as we walk them through it.
That's so beautiful. What made you get into the work that you do?
I think over time, I initially started off was just interested in forensics, but as it's gone on over the many, many years, what keeps me loving it is being able to serve families and again, telling that story. I think if we don't investigate properly or thoroughly to make sure that we're able to speak for that person, nobody else will. And so it's really rewarding to be able to tell that story because sometimes it changes systems or it fixes things or we find where we need to do some preventative work somewhere. And so those are really important aspects of what we do and probably keeps me going day to day.
One word to describe organ donation.
I would say miraculous. And part of that is my own experience with donation. I have a sister-in-law who was a recipient of a liver, and she had non-alcoholic cirrhosis and fatty liver disease and has had a new liver for about 10 years.
Wow.
And, that's miraculous. Whether you are the donating family or the receiving family, just life itself is miraculous. When we think of a baby being born, it's a miracle. Honestly, it's a miracle that happens. And the fact that we have a way to save someone is miraculous.
Last one for you. If someone is unsure about registering as a donor, what would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them to research that, like we kind of mentioned before. And then I think I would have that conversation with your family. If for whatever reason they don't register, if your family knows and you want everybody to know, then register so that it's known when they see your ID and those sorts of things. But discuss that with your family and your wishes. And I think that is so important because in the moment when they're having to make a decision, your family's having to decide really big things. This is one that they don't have to fret over. They already know what your wish is. And so register, get the information, and talk to your family.
Well, thank you, Bobby Joe, for your time today. We really enjoyed having you and just really appreciate all the expertise and knowledge you had to bring us.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor to work with so many families and to work with the opioid agencies, and we'll continue to do that for many years to come.